Today we're going to be doing an intro to Redis. So it's going to be kind of like a fire hose approach to getting into Redis. I'm going to cover a lot of things. I'm going to cover, I'll go into the agenda just here in a second, but um, we're also calling this a demo series. So I'm going to be trying to demo as much as possible as well, with the caveat that I'm going to be doing a lot of the demoing at the end. But let's go ahead and get into it before I get too busy. So, um, my name's Talon Miller. I've been at Redis for almost 3 years, and I do technical marketing. But I'm not a tech like a marketing person. I have a technical background, mostly in data engineering. Not so much a software dev, like a lot of people who are getting to learn and use Redis often are. Um, I have a data science and machine learning background as well. Back when data science used to be really cool, now it's all AI and machine learning. I mean, it's typically the same stuff, but um, and then I came to Redis, and Redis was like, "Hey, come talk about Redis and kind of the things people can do with it." So that's what I'm doing now, and I love it. So the agenda, we're going to talk about what Redis is. We're going to go over some of the basics there, and then we'll go over the different versions of Redis. Some of the most common questions I get are, "Hey, what's the difference between source available, which used to be called, open source, versus Redis Stack versus enterprise versus cloud? What am I going to get between the different ones, the different versions?" So we'll go through that, and then I'll demo a bunch of different things. So if we Google or maybe use ChatGPT, if you chat GTP, what is Redis? You're going to get something very, very similar to this. The biggest difference, and this is 101 type stuff, is that Redis is stored in memory compared to, like, let's say Postgres or MySQL. Like a traditional database is going to be stored on disk. And there's obviously trade-offs of both. Um, but Redis is typically used for speed, right? Because if it's living on RAM or it's living in memory, then it's going to be almost instantaneously accessed. So yeah, interesting little description that you'd probably get from ChatGPT for about Redis. I think it fits pretty well. And I think a really good thing to do is show you a very basic diagram of how it's typically used. Um, this is probably the most common way that people use Redis, and this is what we like to call a cache aside pattern. A cache aside is an excellent choice for like heavy read applications when cache misses are acceptable. We'll get into cache misses a little bit. Um, and then, the application itself handles all the data operations. And then when you use this type of pattern, this cache is going to directly communicate with both the cache and the database, which is pretty cool. So let's go into source available Redis, previously known as open source Redis. It's a top rated in memory data structure store. Being in memory, like I've said, it's super fast because you don't need to execute slow reads or writes to disk. And like I mentioned, it's source available, so it's dual licensed under RSAL v2 and the server-side public license SSL PL v1, which allows for a free download. I think there was a big misconception when we changed our license that like you'd have to put in your information or that wouldn't be free. It's not true. It's literally the same for everyone besides cloud providers. The developers and people across the world using Redis open source, it's going to be the same thing for you, which is great. Um, Whoever uses source available version is responsible, however, for all of its operation and maintenance, right? That's kind of the agreements that people come to when using open source software, or at least in our case, source available software. It's free as in like you're getting a free puppy, right? Um, One of the biggest misconceptions is that, open source or source available is free. What I mean that by that is there's no checkout price, right? We're not going to charge for source available Redis, or you're not going to pay for an open source software. However, there is a amounts that you need to pay for maintaining, managing, and developing source available or open source software. In fact, many customers, you know, come to us for our enterprise offering from our open source or source available option, right? It gets to a point where, hey, I don't want to have a dedicated team just to managing open source software, right? And so I feel like that's very typical in the journey for most people is they might want to test or build proof of concepts in open source. But once you start having a serious demand for serious scale and performance, typically what I've seen, I guess, at Redis is that people want to rely on a source, right, or experts, and have support, and not have to worry about managing the throughput and making sure that your services don't go down because a number of reasons. But anyways, before I divert and go to a huge tangent, a source available Redis provides robust data retrieval and manipulation, like features such as support for various data types. And we'll get into this in the next slide, but Redis is loved because, or at least for a number of reasons, but definitely because of the amount of data types that it has. If you come from like a traditional SQL type background, like I do, where you're used to just relational tables, this is a completely different world. In fact, it's very, very similar to like a data structures class in computer science, where you're learning about sorted sets and lists and hashes. Redis stores all of those things in memory, which makes Redis a really beloved tool by developers. You think that like, maybe system engineers or infrastructure type people who actually interact with the data, would love their traditional databases and so forth. Developers love Redis because it's very familiar. Yeah, we'll go into that in the next slide, but um, so we also, have encouraged community contributions, fostering a continuous, improvement and innovation within the Redis ecosystem, which means a strong, strong community of champions and advocates in every industry. You can see some of the stats there from GitHub and Docker. It's amazing how beloved and used Redis is. Now I want to get into is probably one of my favorite slides of the whole presentation. If you can take a snapshot of this, I highly recommend it. It certainly helps me as someone who's coming from more of a SQL type background, of like, hey, here are some of the basic data types in Redis. What does it look like when it's stored? And also on the right side, what are some common use cases, which I think is awesome. We'll touch on a couple of these use cases throughout the presentation today as well. Um, but yeah, I love to see how things are stored. I guess that's the data engineer in me. Might not be so interesting to others, but we'll move on. I guess before we go into Redis Stack, I'll share my screen on a different page here. So getting started with Redis source available, or what was previously known open source, is the same as it always has been, which is you can install from source, which is what I typically do. Um, and of course, for any type of distribution you want, from Linux to Mac OS, Windows, etc. Let's say, for example, for Mac, it's literally one line of code or one terminal command, where you brew install Redis. Brew being, I'm sure most of you are familiar. It's a package that you need on Mac to install a lot of different packages and binaries. But anyways, very, very, very easy to install, and something that we hear a lot. I go to a lot of events for Redis. Something I hear a lot from people on the ground and developers is it just works, right? It's not something you have to configure and have like, go to a different, a bunch of different forums to try to figure out how to get it to start working. It literally just works. It's very, very easy to start using. Okay, so let's get into Redis Stack. So, right, I wouldn't be surprised if for many of you, hearing Redis Stack might be the first time you've ever heard of it. For us, it's just an additional offering that we have, which is basically source available Redis with some add-ons. and it's still free and free to use, right? But we wanted to offer some of those really popular features that people try to build from the ground up, right? Like some additional data structures. Um, but we wanted to offer those to the community so that they didn't have to do that, right? So, in addition, it comes with a couple other things like Redis Insight, which we'll demo later today too. And if you haven't heard of Redis Insight, don't worry, we'll go over it. So let's go over some of the things that are available in Redis Stack that's not available on the Community Edition. So here are some advanced, we call them advanced because um, they're not available in the Community Edition. Data structures that are available on Redis Stack, but not on Community Edition. And don't want to steal thunder from a future release coming very soon, but this is definitely going to change. So you'll see some of these come to Redis Community Edition, which is going to be a huge deal. Um, but anyways, so you got things like JSON store, right? You can store JSON with Redis Stack. You can do search with Redis Stack. You can do vector with Stack, time series, and probabilistic. I on all of these are obviously super crucial. JSON obviously being a very, very popular way to store data today, not just documents, but data in general. Vector obviously being very, very popular for AI. And in fact, we've actually been storing vectors in Redis for over 2 years now. And we've had, customers using AI use cases in Redis long before ChatGPT was even a thing. So we've actually been seen as a leader in vector database store, um, just because of how long we've actually had customers in production. Whereas today, I think you go to some of these investor calls for like AWS, and they're like, "Yeah, we've got a ton of people testing, but not so many people in production, right?" So we've got many customers using vector in production. Time series, obviously this is for timestamp type data. Whenever I spin up a Redis database, I always have time series. Um, Coming from a business intelligence background, I love to be able to visualize my data. So that's part of it for sure. And then probabilistic, just a bunch of different filters that you can use to do different calculations on top of your data that lives in Redis, which is pretty cool. So let's get into Redis Enterprise. I like to break Redis Enterprise into two sections, which is our software offering, which is on-prem, versus my cat just jumped on my lap, excuse me, versus our cloud offering. And we'll actually demo both of those today too, the cloud and the enterprise offering, and kind of show you the differences. Obviously, the cloud offering is going to be there for let's get the tail out of the way. The cloud offering is there for Redis as a service, right? So you think of like Elasticache or other versions of Redis that are on the cloud providers. It's our offering that's in-house. That's also cloud agnostic. I'll go through that later on. But anyways, Redis Enterprise brings a lot of features that aren't available on Redis Stack or Redis open source, and then we'll go through each one of those. But things like geo distribution, yeah. So you can see a bunch of images down there in the bottom, but like advanced capabilities that we'll go through one by one on what they actually mean. Um, Many companies discover Redis, on the open source, like I said. But then, of course, enterprise is usually a pretty typical route for them. And a lot of that is because we do have in-house support, right? But Redis Enterprise, it combats a bunch of different challenges to make it easy for like architects and IT to manage Redis. Managing Redis open source from a large point of view. But as I've already mentioned, like Redis Enterprise comes in two forms, cloud and software. So let's actually dive into those. So first, it's important to know that Redis Enterprise provides a flexible architecture. So what does that mean? We're available everywhere, whether that's on any cloud provider you can think of or on Kubernetes. Um, and we make it flexible to deploy, however you want, whether it's single cloud, multi-cloud, private cloud, whatever you prefer. In fact, I talk a lot about Kubernetes because I have some Kubernetes in my background, and I realize that like with you're either a Kubernetes shop or you're not. Um, but I will say that speaking to a lot of customers and seeing a lot of customer examples that come to Redis Enterprise, managing Redis open source on Kubernetes is not easy to do because of how the nodes are structured, how to do clustering in Kubernetes. It's really, really quite hard. We have an operator for Kubernetes that automates a lot of this. So actually, you'll find that majority of Redis users or companies that do use Redis and who also are Kubernetes shops, um, Redis Inc., the company, is really the only great solution as of today for Kubernetes and enterprise, or at least getting Redis operationalized and commercialized. So let's go on to Redis Cloud. It's not self-managed like software. Obviously, software you want to be able to manage, your nodes and your clusters and make sure all the data is in-house. Cloud is obviously fully managed and is by far the easiest way to manage Redis. And like I said, is cloud agnostic. So why Redis Inc. though? There's other cloud offerings, right? When you think of like Elasticache or Google Memory Store. Well, the way I see it is that the CSP offerings like Elasticache are very basic versions of Redis. Um, they're going to be very similar to Redis source available, where they have like the basic functionality, they have the basic data structures, but they don't have like the type of infrastructure that we have to build on top of for like enterprise type of features. So let's get into those. So first, we have two enterprise grade tools that our customers love and um, also officially support client libraries, which is huge. I'll get into each one of these individually. So Redis Insight is the first one, which is our GUI for Redis that can do much more than people realize. It's not just for seeing your data in Redis, and I'll actually show you a bit of that today too. Um, and then Redis data integration is incredible. Having that data engineering background, it's by far the easiest way to get your data from external databases like let's say MongoDB or Postgres, MySQL, you name it, Oracle, and get your data into Redis. But it's not just like ingesting data, but also doing things like write behind. Um, and then the supported client libraries is huge. Um, the reason why is because there are, let's say, there's literally dozens of client libraries for Redis that you can use. However, we have 6 different client libraries that are available that we officially support in-house so that we can say, hey, if you use this client library, we guarantee that it'll have the exact same experience, support, versioning across the board, right? And those 6 client libraries are .NET, Redis, which is for Java, Python, Node.js, Go, and Redis, which is another Java based. So we chose those 6 being that they were the 6 most popular support or client libraries. So we started supporting those as well. So let's get into some enterprise capabilities. And these are, you know, the maybe top 6 reasons why customers choose us over, let's say, Elasticache or other cloud offerings out there. And if you read through them, it might just seem like a lot of jargon. So let's actually dive in and go through them. So hyperscale architecture, what does that even mean? It sounds like a marketing term to me, but it does have actually have some great meaning. So it's our ability as Redis, the company, to help our customers scale up to the highest demand or throughput on the market. The ability to scale across the world, which we'll touch on more with active-active, and the resilience and security to scale without diminished performance. That's a big deal. If you look at benchmarking for Redis Enterprise or Redis Cloud versus Elasticache or others, um, it's a it's quite eye-opening. Obviously, everyone's not in the same boat in regards to like the type of performance or throughput that you need. But if you are one of those, large enterprise companies that needs a ton of scale and performance, ours is the only offering on the market that isn't going to have diminished performance over time and with size. And then let's get into active-active, which I love to talk about. I like to couple active-active and high availability together, and I think you'll see why. One kind of goes with the other. And it's the ability to replicate data between Redis across geographically distributed regions. So say, for example, you have a database in, you know, the West Coast, East Coast, Western Europe, and wherever else. Active Actives allows you to replicate that data to all those data centers within real time so that all your users or apps and services within each region has, sub-millisecond responses. And because of this, you're enabled to have 5 nines of high availability, which is by far the highest uptime on the market. With Elasticache, you get 4 nines, which is about 5 minutes of downtime per month. And with Google Memory Store, you get 3 nines of uptime, which is like a terrible 45 minutes of downtime per month, which is it's pretty significant. With 5 nines, you get 26 seconds of guaranteed downtime per month, which is not bad at all. So that's why if we were just to be an open book and show you a catalog of our biggest customers, they're going to be major banks, financial institutions, healthcare, and so on, because these critical type use cases can't afford the downtime, right? Well, obviously, not everyone's in that boat. However, if it is a requirement, we definitely shine there. Robust durability. If you're familiar with Redis, then you'll be familiar that Redis has two main types of persistence: append only file, or AOF, and RDB, also known as snapshotting. What you probably don't know is that AWS Elasticache doesn't support a append only file. And actually, Google Memory Store just came out with a append only file. So they just came out with that, which is pretty cool. Which writes all operations performed by Redis to disk, which is by far the best method to control loss of data. So in regards to people have been talking about using Redis as a primary database. Obviously, Redis being on memory typically flushes when machines shut down. Durability is obviously important to turn Redis into a database type, database like. So yeah, durability is important. Redis Enterprise obviously has the options there. Auto tiering. So this is a really, really cool feature that actually kind of goes in tandem with using Redis as a primary database, because it allows applications that need real-time processing on large amounts of data. Um, because it's no secret that RAM is expensive, right? And auto tiering allows us to store your data in SSDs or flash in addition to RAM. And I'll actually demo that later today too, or later in this presentation. So it's going to, let's say, for example, you wanted to store a huge data set in RAM. You could enable auto tiering and save up to like 80% in costs, but without diminishing performance, which is pretty cool. And something really exciting about auto tiering is that we recently acquired SpeedDB. SpeedDB was the company on the forefront of developing Flash as memory, or as for data storage. Yeah, we obviously acquired them to continue to improve and innovate on top of Flash. I hope that one day, let's say, you know, 5 years, 10 years down the road, I wouldn't be surprised if we're all using Flash storage instead of RAM because Flash is just so much cheaper. It really just, the only thing that's wrong with Flash right now is it's lacking the amount of innovation and functionality that RAM has been, that has had. But that's because there's been so much development on RAM for nearly 2 decades. Anyways, multi-tenancy is another huge and awesome benefit that doesn't exist on source available Redis, nor on any of the other cloud offerings, which is simply put, the ability to do more with less. Redis Enterprise were able to essentially host multiple Redis databases on a single machine, Redis databases in a Redis cluster while maintaining logical resource isolation and efficiency. So it's more of an internal thing for us, but the the big thing is that we can afford cheaper prices for our customers because we can do things more efficiently internally. Or if you're doing software and you're doing it your own, definitely applies to you as well. And then, of course, security. There's no other offering on the market that has the level of security that we have. And this might be one of the biggest challenges for open source um, customers is that there are shops out there that are open source shops. They're going to build from the ground up open source and use it until they can't. I can think of many household companies that do this. Um, and the problem with doing this is that once you start getting big enough as a company, and a lot of these companies are, they just need to start doing some different security. They need to start being, checked off for different compliance and security mandates. And a lot of open source software does not have that developed. And so they have to do that from the ground up, doing things like PCI or different TLS or SOC requirements or GDPR compliance or private sector security compliance for STIGs. These kind of things just do not exist with open source. Um, and so a number of security type sensitive use cases and companies come to us because of our security on top of Redis. Okay, so let's jump into use cases and then we'll start demoing some stuff. And hopefully we'll get no more visits. So, thousands of Redis Enterprise customers use us for things like instant fraud detection that keeps banks and consumers a step ahead of criminals, and to deliver a responsive online gaming leaderboard at massive scales. And I mean, like massive. We have a customer from India who is building has a gaming platform, and they were having 1 million users, new users per month. Imagine you were in charge of that scale. That is daunting. If I was in charge of having to handle that scale for my data infrastructure, that is quite the challenge. Or, of course, we're here to power the next generation of AI and ML applications using Redis as a vector database. In fact, I'm not sure if you guys remember or if you saw AWS reInvent last year. But AWS announced Redis Cloud as one of 3 vector databases supported for AWS Bedrock. So with the big partnership there. So let's get into some demos. I think the first thing we'll do is we'll go through Redis Cloud, kind of set up a database there, kind of go through some of the UI, and then we'll go through Redis software, kind of show you the differences. Um, and then we'll end with Redis Insight and do some things there and kind of show you some of the basics of Redis. Um, and I'll show you and tell you why. But before I do that, let me stop sharing my screen so I can re-authenticate here really quick. And then we'll get going. Thanks for your patience as we, started a little later and I'm having Cat issues today too. So yeah, thanks for your patience, but at least it makes it a little bit more entertaining, right? Not your typical presentation today. Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, welcome to Redis Cloud. Okay, if you haven't been here before, this is what it looks like. One of the first things you might notice is the Google Cloud Marketplace right here on the top left. That's just because I am accessing it through my Gmail account, and my Gmail account happens to be set up right now on on Google Cloud Marketplace. However, like if I was to go through our company's Okta, um, we have a technical marketing team account through AWS. So I might say AWS here. Or if you haven't decided to connect it with any of the marketplaces, it wouldn't be there. So, anyways, very dynamic there. Don't worry too much about it. Um, we'll go ahead and go through what it's like to get started on creating a database, as we don't. So it's kind of counterintuitive. I don't know. Maybe it's just it's not. If you're familiar with Redis open source or source available Redis, you're kind of used to going from nodes to clusters to then having a database. We do it the opposite. We found, we're trying to make it the best, experience possible. We, of course, being a cloud offering, you don't have to worry about the nodes or the clustering. We handle all of that in the background. So therefore, the only thing you need to worry about is your database. And so that's kind of where we start, where, we go from like, what is your use case for? Um, you know, we're going to automatically enable some features depending on the use case here from some predetermined things. You can obviously look at what they are or not worry about it at all. It's not our way to like stuff features in your face, but it's more of like giving you an idea of what our customers are doing if they are trying to use Redis as a database or they are doing vector search. Anyways, we'll keep it as cache. And then we have two subscription options, Essentials and Pro. Essentials is our fixed monthly option that also includes like a free option for people to test. And then Pro comes with some additional functionality, um, like our high availability active, like I mentioned, that provides the 5 nines and other things. But that's also going to be built on consumption, right? We'll go down and we can change the name of our database if you wanted. We can choose the cloud vendor we would want this database to be set up in. And then we can say if we want single zone, multi-zone, choose the kind of data persistence that we want. Like I mentioned, append only file or snapshotting. We can choose what region to deploy it in Redis Stack or Memcached. Some people like to set up Memcache and Redis Stack to do different testing and benchmarking, but Redis Stack has obviously all those data types that you're familiar with. And then you can obviously choose the type of sizing that you want. It's a little bit static when it comes to doing essentials because you're getting a dedicated amount of memory, which is going to come with a dedicated amount of throughput. Whereas let's go to Pro really quick. It's much more customizable. If I was to go through the next screen, um, you can actually set up different throughputs and different um, data types and so forth. So anyways, we'll go back and go back one more. We'll keep it with essentials. And then you just confirm and pay, which yeah, it's that easy. And it takes maybe a minute to set up. And then you have a public endpoint that you can use for your applications. So another great thing about Redis Cloud versus other cloud providers is that we have one single endpoint that's never going to change. That's if you're familiar with Redis open source, it's a huge deal because um, as nodes and failover happens on Redis open source, endpoints can change, which means code changes, which means unhappy customers or developers. So yeah, we love the fact that we provide a single endpoint that is unchanging. Then of course, it's up now, but we could edit and still make some changes to our database here as well. um, like TLS and some nice alerting based on some different metrics. Then if we go back out here, something I really like is being able to connect through different ways. So, like for example, we could open with Redis Insight. It's going to automatically open up our database in Redis Insight and show us all the data there and things that we can do there. And then we can connect to a CLI, and then we can connect to a Redis client. Like I said, we have those officially supported clients. Right now, we've got 4 listed on cloud, where we've got a connection string that we can very quickly, you know, put into our IDE or our coding environment. And then quick, let's maybe go over like 2 more things before we jump into Redis Enterprise or the software. So we do have a way to interact and do things programmatically with Redis Cloud. So you can set up some APIs or API keys here. And then of course, user management is huge, right? Doing it on open source or source available. Typically use ACLs. You can certainly upload and do that here as well if you wanted to, or you can just do role-based access, which is great, right? Um, so yeah, let me know if you have any questions about Redis Cloud. But in the meantime, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen one more time, and I will re-authenticate to software and get us into there. Yeah, looks like we're already good to go, actually. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, awesome. So similar view, right? But we're seeing some things that you might be more familiar with if you're even used to managing Redis yourself, which is what does our cluster look like? What do our nodes look like? Obviously software is going to be a lot more hands-on. And that's the way that, customers want it if they do want data on-prem. This is obviously one of our most popular offerings here at Redis, the company. And especially since the rise of AI, a lot of people are wanting to use domain specific data or their own data instead of data available through different LLMs. And so you'll see that a lot of people are using on-prem or software offerings for their AI apps and use cases. Um, Inside our cluster, menu here, we can see a bunch of different metrics related to our software deployment. I just spun this up, maybe an hour or two ago. It's a multi zone setup. So I've got 3 different regions set up with 3 different clusters. So yeah, it's spread across the world. So I'll be able to show you what active looks like and how easy that is to set up. And I also have, as you can see, flash memory enabled here as well. So I can show you that too. Go through different security things like adding our own certificates, OCSP and TLS, things that you want to be able to control if you're managing this on your own. Different metrics. There's obviously nothing to see here because I just set it up and I don't have any databases being used. Log, and then modules. This is cool just because as you start, setting up various databases and upgrading, depending on whether it's in testing or production, this is just a quick and easy way to see, um, what databases have what versionings in regards to data types. And then, of course, you have nodes, primary versus secondary. You click in, you can see a very similar view to our clusters in regards to throughput and storage metrics. And then let's create a database. And instead of doing like a typical database that we've done before, let's go ahead and create an active database. I need to put in credentials for someone who has access to, or permissions to set up active. We don't allow just anybody to set up active. And then it's as simple as that. There's really nothing else to configure. If you do have a multi-cluster, multi-region setup, Redis software is smart enough to know that you have the capabilities to do an active database. You can obviously configure a bunch of different things here, but I think the number one thing I wanted to show you, which was auto tiering, which is Flash. So our auto tiering is no code and it's very, very easy to use. So let's say, for example, we're going to give this active database 10 gigabytes of memory total, and we want, let's say, 20% of it to be reserved for RAM. And that means that 2 gigs of our total database is going to be RAM, whereas 8 gigs or the remaining 80% is going to be all flash, which is pretty sweet. And that's all we have to do. It's going to automatically promote and demote values or keys in your Redis database, depending on whether they need to be warm or hot, or whether they're required or being used or not. It's literally as easy as that. Like I said, no code, which is pretty cool. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to show you how easy it was if you did have active setup. Software recognizes that. I also wanted to show you how easy auto tiering was. And then access control, um, very typical RBAC. We also have LDAPs, so you can set up with your identity providers, and then obviously ACLs too, if that's something you're looking to do. Okay, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen there, and then we'll jump into Redis Insight. Welcome to Redis Insight. Right now we're looking at our Redis databases that are connected. This top one is my currently active one. Let's go ahead and move that, close that out. So I have no keys currently right now into this database, and we'll create some keys together and kind of go through that and show you what that looks like. You can bulk upload, right? So let's say for some reason you did have a data set on your machine that you wanted to upload, you certainly could. You can also add keys individually. I'm not sure why someone would want to do this. Maybe just for like testing purposes or to see how, let's say you're building a concept of some sort and you wanted to see how it would work. I mean, you can do that. You can do a key one by one if you wanted to. Um, and then let's see. Let's go to the workbench, which is our advanced CLI. This is awesome because it has autocomplete and it also has um, basically descriptions or parameters of how to complete the different Redis commands that you're trying to do, which is great. So it makes it a lot easier to interact and learn Redis. We'll come back to this in a second. We have an analysis tool to show essentially a slow log of what's currently happening with the connections that you have set up to Redis. We have PubSub, like a menu for PubSub. So if you're familiar with PubSub, it's an ability to set up streaming with Redis, and this is a great menu for that. We have our CLI here as well. It's gonna be very similar to accessing Redis in a terminal, right? Also very similar to our advanced CLI, our workbench. But if for some reason you'd rather do something here, here it is. Got our command helper, of course, which is great. So let's say if we wanted to know what like JSON.set did, take a look at that, look at the arguments that are required and not required, and so forth, and also links to documentation, which is great. And then a profiler, which is mine will be really boring because I don't have this connected to anything. It's going to show us the commands that are being executed against this database. And you'll notice that every few seconds or so, we're getting the info command, and that is because we're on Redis Insight. So Redis Insight needs the info command to be able to display and do the different things that we're doing here. Okay, one or two more things before I actually show you some different command stuff. And that is um, our insights or our tutorials area, which is super, super cool. Let's say, for example, you wanted to learn how to do basic RAG or retrieval augmented generation, which is used for LLMs and AI use cases. Um, we actually have tutorials that will help you go step by step. And what's really cool about this is that we give you code to run, and you can even, run it against your database. So it'll actually create keys in your database so that you can interact with it and test out different scenarios. we'll actually build out all the keys for you so that you can follow along and kind of see the interactions of different things there. So pretty cool. It's a good way to learn. Okay, so let's go through maybe some commands that are like very popular. Let's say, for example, I wanted to do a JSON.set, right? This is going to allow us to essentially set a key in JSON on our Redis database, and it's going to have a couple of different values. I've already copied a string for us to take a look at really quick. So let's say, for example, I'm building a maybe a customer support like hub, right? Where people are going to go to if they need help. And I'm doing a FAQ or a frequently asked question, and I'm setting these up in Redis so that they're very fast and customers can, there's no load time and it's very easily accessible, right? I can easily set this on my database. Okay, that worked. We'll go through. Let's finally look at what a key looks like on our key manager. We'll go ahead and refresh. There it is. Now we can look at what it looks like or how it's stored on Redis. And then let's see, what if, for example, we wanted to create an index on top of that key so that if someone text searched in our, let's say, a search box on our customer support portal or hub, that it'd be searchable, right? So we're going to create an index on top of that key. And then let's say, for example, we'll do our search on top of that. Or like the question is, what's the maximum amount for a check deposit? Right? We're going to get that back, right? And so here's our whole string of essentially our key and our FAQ number and so forth. But what if like that's kind of ugly, right? I don't want to have to deal with that in my app or on the app side. I'd have to, concatenate and change all of that. So we can actually interact with the data quite a bit to make it cleaner and more easily used in Redis as well. So now we'll add the return one answer instead, to essentially just get exactly what we need. There we go. Bingo. So anyways, there's a lot of really cool things. I think one of the main reasons why people love Redis is that there's a lot of things you can do with interacting with the data at the source or with the data instead of having to do it on the app side, which makes applications so much cleaner. But anyways, quick little demonstration of Redis Insight really quick. Something that is cool that's coming to Redis Insight is Copilot. And you might be thinking, okay, well, why Copilot? Why another chatbot for me to use that like I could easily use in my browser? Well, it's a little different. So it's going to be interacting with your own data inside of Redis. And also, let's say, for example, we're outside of our databases. If we're using Redis Copilot outside of our database, it's going to be interacting with our Redis docs, right? So anything searchable for Redis docs, it's going to be interacting with that. So you can ask it a lot of generalized Redis questions. But then if you were to use Redis Copilot inside of your database, then you'd be able to ask it questions in relation to your database, or in relation to your data. So for example, let's say we're at this point in our developing and we're like, oh, that string is really ugly. I don't want that to be returned. You could ask Copilot, hey, can you, show me a command to help me get just the answer, right? And it's going to help you get this command, which will be a lot cleaner. So anyways, just some things coming down the road. Cool. We're 1 minute over. Usually this is like a 45-minute presentation, but today was a little bit chaotic, and I apologize for that, but I appreciate you hanging on and staying with us. I'm gonna go through some of the questions. Looks like we have a question on any comments on Valky. No comments on Valky. Look, Redis itself is so established in the market and in the world. It's taught in every computer science class. It's the same as it was after the source or after the licensing change. The only people it affects is the cloud providers. We just simply are not allowing the cloud providers to take our most recent release and resell it. And all of our customers have been very supportive of that. We've got some big announcements coming around that too with other cloud providers. So AWS, obviously, and that's to be expected for them to react the way they did. They do that, they react that same way anytime someone closes their software. But historically with AWS, they're going to stay on the last version that that open source software company developed, right? Or very close to it. You can see this historically with many products. They'll be on 7.2, which we, released last year. I'm sure they'll come out with like a 7.4 or something. But we'll be on Redis 10, by a year or two from now. You know what I mean? So we're not too worried about it. At least that's my point of view. I'm not obviously anyone important at Redis, but yeah, no, our community, I think there was an initial freak out of like, oh my gosh, like it's closed source. I can no longer develop open source anymore. It's like it's not true. The only caveat, the only thing we changed was for cloud providers. So hopefully that helps. Okay, there are a bunch of comments in chat. Will Redis continue to be available in open source community beyond version 7.2? Mm. Um, you'll see news on this later this week, actually, for whoever asked this. We're going to be releasing 7.4, and uh, I think it's going to be great news for anybody who's thinking about that. But yeah, keep your eyes open for that. Cool. I know we're 4 minutes over. I apologize. I was hoping to get into more questions. But feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever if you have, I do these presentations all the time. So feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to answer your questions. But with that, yeah, Rebecca, Katie, I think we can end.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Talon.
Yeah, bye bye.